Cloud from Texas for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Gary, how many years have you spent in the field of immunology? Virology.
Yeah, sorry. About 45.
45, that is significant, no doubt. I think, I'm not a scientist, don't pretend to be, but I think it's hard sometimes for the American people when we go through things and we read things like where 2 days prior to a draft being released, you are saying, literally, I really can't think of a plausible natural scenario where you get from a bat virus to one very similar to it, to COVID. You said, I just can't figure out how this gets accomplished in nature. It's stunning. And then 2 days later, while it wasn't the proximal origins paper, it was basically the conclusion that you had outruled that as a hypothesis. And you said, you know, what new data came available? We imagine it took, you know, there's 2 days between that and February 4th. Your statement, I assume it took a day to write the draft, and so that's one heck of a data dump in one single day that would change 42 years of experience that led to this previous hypothesis. 45 years, I believe, was it? You said it was because of some new data that came available on the pangolin, and Dr. Anderson, you agreed with this in a interview in the New York Times. You said, for example, we looked at data from COVID being found in other species such as bats, pangolins, which demonstrated that other features first appeared unique to COVID were in fact in other related diseases. But during the peer review part, you said that was not data that was included, that the pangolin information had no leaning into the conclusions you made. Is that correct?
So the timeline keeps changing here. First it's 2 days, and it's 3 days, it's 4 days. It's actually 45 days when we're talking about
It's 45 days before the draft was published,
I
but
think
there's
it's
a peer
important.
review period, and within 2 days, the conclusion had changed from, oh, this is not going to, oh, it's impossible that this could have happened. So that is true. And then you spent some time actually drafting proximal origins, and then you had it peer reviewed. During the peer review process, they brought up, there was questions asked to you, and you said there is no evidence on present data that pangolin COVID are directly related to COVID-19, in spite of the fact that a year later you said the opposite of that on national TV. And so that's concerning to me. You also said that anyone believes anything contrary to you know, the wet market theory is a conspiracy theorist. And then you corrected that statement, but you certainly said that those of us in the majority, that's not a scientific statement, that's a political statement. You've also said the only scientific data that is correct points to proximal origins, to natural origins. Yet we have the FBI, the DOE, we have a number of other scientists who've worked in this field for decades also pointing to this. Are you concerned that the lab in China deleted information?
So I think there's a lot of questions in there, there's a lot of words at least, but I think the important thing is that, again, if you look at the intelligence community, for example, the majority of them believe this is natural, right? If you look at the recent report, it says almost all agencies agree that SARS-CoV-2 was not genetically engineered. That's one of our main conclusions in the proximal origin.
And after recent information, they're changing their viewpoint. That was originally, and new information has come out. Do you have access to classified information?
I do not. I think it's important to realize,
Do you think it's not concerning? Do you think that the CCP is a trusted partner?
I don't think the CCP is the trusted partner, no.
You said you based your conclusions a lot on the publicly available data coming out of the lab. That publicly available data is what China has made available to the public. And at the meantime, we see them destroying data. We see them not allowing us access to the lab to research anything. And then we also see scientists disappearing who worked in China. You don't find that concerning, and that doesn't cause any sort of suspicion?
I think it's important to understand that the conclusions are based in part on evidence from China. Of course, the pandemic started in China, so necessarily early data on cases and what happens at the market will necessarily have to be from China itself. However, several of our conclusions do not rely on evidence from China. For example, the majority of the conclusions in proximal origin are based on publicly available data, which is not just from China, that's from elsewhere as well. In later papers, a lot of our conclusions can be replicated using data that is from outside of China. So there's no specific reliance on any single data set. There's also not, importantly, there's not one single piece of data that would convince me it's this or it's that. And I think the pangolins, which continue to be misrepresented of what we actually mean, is an important point of that. The reviewer said that based on the pangolin data, you can just reject any potential lab leak origin. And we say you can't do that. The pangolin data itself is insufficient to do that. You need to look at the consilience of evidence, and you need to look at all the evidence in concert, and that's exactly what we're doing in proximal origin. And that is also one of the reasons why our thinking on this particular question evolved over time from early hypotheses to later conclusions published in the peer review.
Can you not acknowledge that there are qualified scientists in this field who disagree with you?
Absolutely.
Are they conspiracy theorists?
They are not conspiracy theorists, and I think it's important to have
Thank you, my
scientific
time's up.
debate
I
and
get that.
disagreement.